Let's talk about a new kind of risk that's quietly emerging for organizations. It's this subtle fragility, and it builds up even when all the traditional metrics are looking great. So, in this briefing, we're going to break down what it is and why it's so important to get a handle on it. It's a tension a lot of leaders are feeling right now. All your performance indicators are green, everything looks good on paper, but you've got this growing sense that things are more fragile than they seem. Well, that feeling is real, and we're about to explain exactly why. So, if you just look at the surface, everything seems completely fine. Across pretty much every sector, client operations look steady. Revenue's growing, margins are where they should be, and the business feels predictable. Right. There are no immediate fires to put out, no big red flags popping up on the dashboards, and this can create a really powerful and pretty dangerous false sense of security. Because under that calm surface, new tech like AI is quietly introducing some serious systemic weaknesses. And these aren't the kinds of risks that your traditional oversight or reporting are even designed to catch. They build up silently, kind of like stress in a material, right until it hits a breaking point. And that brings us to what we're calling a new operating physics. What's so fascinating here is how AI and automation are fundamentally changing the rules of how organizations operate, and it's often happening before leadership even notices. We're not just talking about new tools here, it's a whole new set of roles. Okay, so let's break this down. First, the physics of cost are basically inverting. You'd think automation would lower costs, but without totally redesigning your processes, it can actually drive up fixed costs in areas like compliance. Second, the expectations around speed, they just accelerate invisibly. As AI speeds up every cycle, the time for actual human judgment just evaporates. And third, accountability gets blurry. I mean, when an automated system makes a mistake, who's responsible? That accountability just collapses upward, landing right on the desks of senior leadership. So this new reality creates a huge exposure for every advisor and consultant out there, which brings us to our next point, the hindsight trap. This chart just illustrates the problem perfectly. Our advisory frameworks, they were built for a world that assumed stability and predictable risks, but we're now operating in a reality of systemic acceleration and complex second-order effects. We're dealing with what you could call narrative risk, which is all about how your perfectly logical actions today are going to be perceived later on, and that can be absolutely devastating. And here's the crucial point. Advice that is perfectly sound and diligent today can easily be viewed as negligent in hindsight, especially if it fails to account for these deep structural shifts. When things go wrong, the question won't be, was your advice correct at the time? It's going to be, why didn't you see these systemic risks coming? Okay, so this raises a really critical question. How can you possibly advise safely in this new environment? Well, that brings us to our third section, separating build from break. Analysis from firms like Aegyon suggests that a fundamental separation of functions is really what's required. So, the safer path forward seems to involve two really distinct phases. First, you build the strategy. You do it with all the necessary optimism and confidence. But then, and this is absolutely key, you have to have a separate, rigorous break phase. Think of it as an adversarial stress test designed specifically to find every hidden weakness and failure mode before it can actually materialize. And you really need an objective outside perspective for this. Because let's be honest, it's nearly impossible to relentlessly try and break a plan you just finished building. All of this leads us to our final section, redefining value. It all points to a fundamental shift in the value proposition for senior advisors. The job itself is actually changing. The most critical role for an advisor today is no longer just about architecting a confident strategic plan. It's about ensuring that plan is resilient, that it's been pressure tested and is robust enough to withstand all the new, quiet, and accumulating pressures of this AI era. This quote really captures the shift perfectly. In this new era of quiet risk, the question is, what role truly adds the most value? Is it building the initial aircraft, or is it supplying that critical engine thrust when conditions inevitably change? That's really the challenge for every advisor today.